Everybody could take their seats. If y'all can take your seats, we'll get this started. Well, that was easy. Man, normally I have to threaten people. Sit down, we need to get started. It means everybody's excited about it. Good morning and welcome to the return of the Detroit Free Press Breakfast Club Speakers Event. Finally. I'm Carol Kane, columnist at the Free Press and also senior producer host of Michigan Matters on CBS Detroit. And I'm so honored to be with you this morning as host of this morning's festivities. And I want to thank you all for getting up so incredibly early to be here, particularly as it's Juneteenth and many of us are off to celebrate and commemorate this day. And I also want to say hello to the folks with us on live stream, on the Free Press live stream. Hello, good morning. It's great to have everybody here with us. The Free Press launched this series in 2018 with the mission of putting attention and focus on important issues beyond our region, beyond the state, and obviously beyond. Today's forum continues that tradition with a person many of you know, many of you consider a friend, Secretary Jennifer Granholm. The Energy Secretary will be talking about issues that are really, really important and critical to all of us that I know you're interested in hearing more about. And how do I know this? Well, this event sold out quicker than Taylor Swift tickets. That's all I want to tell you. I've had people calling me for the last week and a half trying to get a seat here, so count yourself amongst the privileged many here. I want to acknowledge the many elected officials here in this room. There are too many to mention by name, and their presence, though, this morning, I think, demonstrates just how important this whole issue is. I know Governor Whitmer wanted to be here, but she's in Europe on a trade mission. But we still have former governor, former Ambassador Jim Blanchard, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Haley Stevens, Major Speaker Joe Tate, Wayne County Executive Warren Evans, who was part of the last Breakfast Club we did on regional transit. And thank goodness there seems to be some headwinds finally on that issue. And we also have Detroit City Councilman Coleman Young representing that part of government. So a round of applause for our elected officials. And it gives me great pride to bring up the new editor of the Detroit Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols. She returns to the paper after 2 years as editor-in-chief of Chalkbeat, which is a nationwide journalism nonprofit, which is all about education. She had teams that she oversaw in Detroit, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, Indiana, Chicago, Tennessee, and Colorado. She joined the Free Press in 2000 after she was hired away from the other Detroit paper in town. I won't say their name, but you know who they are. And she made her mark at the Free Press, supervising reporters covering so many important issues: immigration, federal courts, race, restaurants, music, public health, and the pandemic. She was the founding editor of the Free Press's Top 10 Takeover Dining series and led coverage of the opioid epidemic, COVID-19, and the racial reckoning that followed the George Floyd murder. Nicole is also the first African-American woman to hold the top editor's position at the Free Press, something I know the iconic late editor Bob Magruder is smiling from heaven down, so that's great. She lives in Detroit with her husband, Darren, who writes for the Free Press. They have 15-year-old twins. She is so involved in the community in so many different ways. She's going to be such a great addition to the paper. Please put your hands together and bring up Nicole.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, good morning. As you know, my name is Nicole Avery Nichols, and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to the return of the Free Press Breakfast Club, presented by PNC Bank. As the largest media organization in the state of Michigan, we would like to thank you for your support of local news and the Free Press specifically, which has been on guard for 192 years. Today, June 19th, which we call Juneteenth, is a day of historical reverence. It's the day when Union soldiers marched into Galveston, Texas, and informed the enslaved Africans still toiling there that they were indeed free. The reality of that jubilant day, June 19th, 1865, is that it took place 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that declared all persons born slaves in the rebellious states would henceforth be free. But without the reliable, trustworthy information, oppression and dehumanization persisted in the United States, in Texas, and many other states, until the news of freedom slowly made its way across into the former Confederacy. The power of reliable news and information is acutely present on this day. At the Detroit Free Press, we strive to be the consistent and trustworthy source of local news and information. We want to inform, we want to inspire, and we want to entertain. We endeavor to be your go-to outlet for clarity on the issues that matter to you most, like energy, which we'll be discussing today. We also aspire to hold our place as Michigan's definitive news organization that documents how our communities progress, innovate, and move the culture forward. Once again, thank you for being here and in conversation with us. We greatly appreciate your time and continued support. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. I also want to thank Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm and her amazing team for being part, a little bit of feedback there, for being part of this morning's event. We're planning more riveting breakfast clubs coming up, so stay tuned on that. Anyone who stages these kinds of events knows how much work it takes to bring it all together, and we're blessed to be part of an all-star team of our Michigan.com partners. Aaron Velthoven, Amy Rosner, and Sarah Snook. Round of applause. Thank you so much for all your efforts. There's Amy back there. Aaron, I know he's here somewhere. Aaron, Sarah, all right. They're out working somewhere. Also want to thank the Townsend Hotel for their hospitality. And give hearty applause, I can't say thank you enough, to our loyal Breakfast Club sponsors who made this event possible. And if you could hold their applause, I'll announce their names, and if we could applause at the end. So the presenting sponsor, PNC Bank. Diamond sponsor, DTE Energy. Platinum sponsor, AAA Michigan, PVS Chemicals, One, Arnex Energy. Our gold sponsors, MEDC, Deloitte, Henry Ford Health, Huntington Bank, Detroit Auto Dealers. And our silver sponsors, Oakland University, GM, Michigan Chamber, Walbridge, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Dunamis Charge, Lawrence Tech. And our table sponsors, Bank of America, Flagstar, McLaren, and HNTB. Thank you, folks. Round of applause for yourselves. And we also want to give a special shout out to the table that's here from Detroit Public Schools Foundation. They're here thanks to the support of GM and others. We have students who are looking maybe to have careers in energy here. And they are students at Detroit International Academy. So thank you to Detroit Public Foundation President and CEO Carrie Mitchell for facilitating. And where is the table? Where are our young folks? There we go. Our future leaders right there. Maybe a future energy secretary there too. So right now I'd like to bring up Mike Biggers, who's the president of PNC Bank in Detroit, Southeast Michigan, our presenting sponsor, as mentioned, to say a few words. But it's hard to imagine anyone could fill the shoes of his predecessor, Rick DeVore, who was a mainstay in the community and remains in that status. But Mike has done that and more, and in his own unique signature way. He continues the bank's extraordinary leadership and presence in our community. He's also a former alum of Detroit Public Schools. He attended schools on the west side. I attended DPS schools on the east side. I'm not going to hold that against you. So Mike Biggers, come on up and say hello.
Good morning. Yeah, we still have to remain close friends. I tell you what, when I saw so many people here, I feel like I'm right back at Mackinac Policy Conference. I think half of you were there, which was a great session. My friend Matt Elliott was the chairperson of. So at PNC, as big as we are, one of the things we must do is maintain connections with our local communities, and that's my job and my team's job, and that's why it was so important that we partner with Carol to be the presenting sponsor for the first time in many, many years to come. Carol,
thank you.
That's a guarantee.
Yes.
James, make sure that happens. Yeah, and we do that. And I tell you,
we have it on film. We've got it on film.
You got it. And we do that. We have so many partners in the room and so many clients of ours in the room. And it's great to be at a company that is strong enough to continue to support all of those partners and clients in the room as well. Very proud of that in terms of PNC. But that work allows us to do some other important work, which is look out for children, which we always talk about. So tomorrow what we'll do after this event, this sort of professional economic event with our Secretary of Energy here, is, Carol, launch our Inroads partnership for the College Links program as well, where we'll send up to 100 young adults starting in 9th grade right through college to enhance their chances of success. Those are the kind of things we keep wanting to do. Those are the kind of things that all of you support as well. I know you do. So thank you so much for allowing us to be the presenting sponsor.
Thank you so much. Yeah. That's great. That's great. So for those of you who are new, how many people have not been to the Breakfast Club before? Please raise your hand if you have not been here. Okay. So this is how the Run a Show goes here. We're going to have a one-on-one conversation here, but you're also going to have a chance to, in an indirect way, ask a question. On the table, you will see index cards. Please write down your question, and Amy Rosner, Amy, where are you? Raise your hand so people can see you. Amy, she here? She took a coffee break at the wrong time, is what happened. She'll be collecting index cards, and then we'll go through and try to get to some of those at the very end here, too. So with that said, you know, the last time I talked to Jennifer Granholm about energy, climate, and economic development opportunities, we were climbing up a five-story stairwell inside a wind turbine near Port Huron, which was part of the conversation about how to energize communities and new ways of doing it. And again, this is when she was governor way back when. So let's flash forward 15 years. It's been 15 years since that. Can you believe it? Where'd the time go? I was working on a CBS special at the time when we were doing that. So anyways, her trailblazing career has many firsts associated with it. She was the first female Attorney General from 1999 to 2003, the first female governor of Michigan from 2003 to 2011. Who can forget that wonderful Free Press front page? She's the one. It was a huge, I mean, it was such an amazing. Oh, she's the boss. Oh, God. Oh, my God. I'm corrected by the energy sector. There we go. All right. See, it was memorable. It's become, in my own mind, a different thing. But it was a great page. See, you remembered this still. See, Nicole, it does resonate, the Free Press. So she's been a pivotal player, too, on the national political stage for years as well. She's been seen commentating on CNN, NBC. She was nominated by President Biden and approved by Congress in February 2021, and the 16th person to hold this influential cabinet post. Secretary Granholm has traveled across the country and world, often seen alongside President Biden, as she did recently in Ottawa with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We are so happy she's taken time to come home for a few hours and visit with us and join us on the Breakfast Club stage. Please welcome U.S. Energy Secretary and my friend, Jennifer Mulhern Granholm. Here we go. All right. Oh, my gosh. So many questions, so little time. So let's dive in here. Gosh. First of all, it's been a while since you and I were together at an event of this sort, and I guess the question is, how are you doing?
I am.
Are you? Hello. Is that what?
I am.
There we go.
What a. This is an amazing position that I have. So when you ask how I'm doing, it's really about my doing, like doing as opposed to being. It's doing a lot because there is as so many of you know who are in this clean energy space in the audience, there is so much going on because of policy changes. And so consequently, because I love to do, I am doing great.
You're busy.
Yeah, it's busy, but it's really important work, and I have a great boss, and he's totally committed to this, to be able to, you know, bring back manufacturing in the United States, and I hope we get a chance to talk about that.
Right, I know we're going to be talking about all these things here, but on a personal front, you and Dan became grandparents for the first time, and how's that? Your first grandson?
Yes, it's so great.
Yeah.
So, you know, when I finished being governor, I moved to be near my parents because my dad had had a couple of strokes. They live in California, and he's since passed, and my mom now has had a couple of strokes. So Dan lives in California to be near her and my oldest. And then I moved to D.C. for this job. And so my second child, my daughter Cecilia, and her husband are teachers in the D.C. public school system. And so we decided we would move together. And of course, I subsidized this arrangement. But I live in the basement of one of these brownstones, and they live upstairs with the baby, which is so nice. And then our third child, Jack, who does research in Washington, D.C., moved in with us, too. So I live in this compound with my kids, and I love it.
It sounds like a sitcom, All in the Family.
Although a little different. But
yeah. I hear Norman Lear's trying to bring that show back. Maybe he can change it to the Granholm-Mulhern family. All right, we'll leave that alone. For those who know you really well, they say you were tailor-made for this job, given your long-standing passion and interest and aggressiveness around energy and clean energy. The Biden administration clearly shifted focus on the future of energy, and you've been a clean energy wonk for years. As I mentioned, 15 years ago, we were talking about this way before most people were talking about it. Talk about the administration's focus and how it's been shifting.
Yeah, despite what you hear, this administration is totally focused on claiming this clean energy sector and addressing climate change. And the president, I know, asked me to do this job because of our lived experience here in Michigan. When we went through the auto industry meltdown, through the Great Recession, the bankruptcies, and of course all those bankruptcies, the bankruptcies of then Chrysler and GM were preceded by the bankruptcies in the auto supply chain, right? So we were living this. We saw what globalization had wrought to the manufacturing industry. And the president, the now president, was part of the team that brought the first investments that we made from a public-private partnership perspective in electric vehicle batteries. And so we started that diversification happening here. We sort of, I would say, put the cart of supply before the horse of demand. We were a little bit ahead of our time in it, but nonetheless, it is all bearing fruit right now, as you can see. So the president, knowing that, because he came a number of times to announce these auto grants, he knew that Michigan was on its knees, and he knew the power of having a partner in the federal government to lift communities. And so that experience and me having been governor here is why he asked me to be Secretary of Energy, because it's not just Michigan. Obviously, there are communities all across the country who are on their knees. Just quickly, I mean, I was just in Weirton, West Virginia, which is a steel town, or historically has been a steel town. It's the same story we've all heard. The steel plant, one company town, employed thousands of people. When globalization and steel dumping happened, the factory, the plant went down. The town, I went to this groundbreaking. This is the good news side of it, because it's like a phoenix rising from the ashes because of these policy incentives. They created steel, and I was at the groundbreaking for an iron air battery that will be a utility scale battery that is using the incentives. And in between were just years of young people moving away and and I met this, everybody was there for the groundbreaking city council. I met the city council guy, his name is Tim Connell, big burly guy. And he said, you know, I worked at this steel mill for 30 years. My father worked at this steel mill. My grandfather worked at this steel mill. All we knew is how to make steel. It was a noble job. I wanted my kids to work in the steel mill, but then the factory closed down. And if you went to Weirton today, you would see all the shops boarded up. You know what I'm talking about. You've seen these towns, right? And now it was like hope sprung. It was, this community is going to come back to life because they're going to be creating batteries for the clean energy industry. It is one example. 700 jobs will be created. But of course, when a big factory comes, there's supply chain that comes, and it creates an industrial cluster. This is what's happening all across America. This is why the president asked me to do this, because he knew of my lived experience, our lived experience here in Michigan, and how important that is to infuse into a department that now has $100 billion more resources to put out into communities across the country to manufacture stuff, which we had lost our will to do as a nation, really. And last thing I'll just say, Carol, I mean, I remember thinking as governor, when we were going through this and we were trying to recruit, I mean, Gretchen Whitmer's overseas. I would go overseas, try to bring international companies here. But so were other states. But states vying for other countries, it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? Because we didn't have a federal partner. And now we have a bazooka. United States has become the irresistible nation in terms of investment as a result of this president and the policy that he pushed through. That is exciting.
When we talk about energy, electric vehicles is a conversation that resonates pretty much across this room here, as you can imagine here. Let's talk about some of the realistic timing of this when we talk about charging stations. The fact there aren't as many that are needed, I mean, certainly it's going to be challenges. The administration has a goal of 50% of new vehicles being EVs by 2030. Again, this is going to be a challenge, and I know there was the recent announcement of Ford, GM, and Tesla talking about being able to use Tesla's charging stations. That's a whole other talk show. But talk about EV charging stations, what's going on with them, and the rollout of more in the future, because we're going to need them all across the country for apartment complexes, I mean, places that they're nowhere to be seen right now.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of a holistic strategy, right? If we want to create an EV infrastructure in the U.S., clearly you've got to have places for people to charge. So the president has said from the jump that he wanted to see an additional 500,000 charging stations across the country. So we created a joint office between the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And thank you to, I know Haley Stevens, Debbie Dingell are here for your leadership in supporting that bipartisan infrastructure law. Thanks to that, we have $7.5 billion that are going to be going toward those 500,000 charging stations. The states get the money. And so the states had to submit a plan, and Michigan did along with all the others. The first tranche of that money goes to charging corridors. In other words, if you're traveling long distance, you want to be on a travel corridor, the charging stations have to be every 50 mile, not more than 1 mile off the freeway. They have to be app-enabled, and they have to have at least 4 ports. That's the first tranche of funding. The second tranche of funding, which also went out, is for charging in areas that are rural or in urban areas where the private sector has not gone, because there is not a big uptake in EVs. So we wanted to solve the chicken and egg problem, and this is what government partnership with the private sector does, is to make sure that we are saturated enough so that we can make sure that people feel confident in buying electric vehicles. That's one part of the whole EV ecosystem that we are solving for, in addition to the rest of the supply chain, which you may, I don't know if you want me to talk about, but I'm happy to talk about whatever you want me to.
Okay. That's right, no ground rules. That was what we agreed to. So every administration, Republican or Democrat, whoever's in there, always takes as a claim they want to have more products made here in America. So that brings up this conversation of what do we need to do as a country to have more EV batteries made here in this country versus other places like China, where it's much more commonplace right now. What progress is being made along those lines?
Yeah, so China really had a strategic plan to corner the market on battery technology, right? The full thing, including processing of critical minerals. And in fact, today they have, depending on which component of the supply chain, but they have between 70 and 80% of the EV supply chain market. And so the question for us as a nation is, how do you compete with that, right? How do you decide that you are going to be a better place to invest in when we don't have a whole lot, in fact, very, very little of processing of critical minerals. We have very little extraction of critical minerals. How do we crack the code and get back to some of that? Can we do extraction of critical minerals in a sustainable way? Yes, we can. Can we finance, can we partner with companies that are interested in doing processing in a sustainable way? Yes, we can. Can we also not just do assembly of the batteries, but also do the anode, cathode, separator material, electrolyte, the full supply chain for batteries? Can we do that all here? Yes, we can. How do we do that? Number one, on the supply side, of course, we're incentivizing the location of those facilities to be in the United States. On the demand side, we're requiring that if people want to get a $7,500 tax credit in buying an electric vehicle, there's got to be U.S. content. And that's phasing in, but that content makes the movement of these vehicles, the full supply chain of vehicles, here in the U.S. And this is why you're seeing huge amount of investment here not in Michigan. Yes, Michigan is sort of like the #1 state for battery manufacturing now, including the full supply chain, but across the country. Since 2021, since these laws have been passed, it's the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, it's the Inflation Reduction Act, it's the CHIPS and Science Act, blah, blah, blah. We call it the Invest in America agenda. And since those incentives have been passed, there have been, at least at the end of last month, 160 battery supply chain companies that have announced they're coming to America or expanding in America. 160. That is amazing, and it continues to grow. Similarly, China had a market on solar panels, right? In fact, we had a bunch of solar companies in Michigan when I was governor that basically got bought out and went to China. A few battery companies, the same thing happened. So these incentives bring that manufacturing back. And since the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, we've had 50 solar companies say that they are moving and expanding in America. Billions of dollars worth of investment. $200 billion worth of investment just in the clean energy space has been announced since the passage of this agenda. So amazingly, policy works. It's happening.
And you can say, well, goes around, comes around, right? It's like a boomerang. Eventually we'll come back this way.
Well, it doesn't just happen, though. Clearly,
right.
We have to be intentional. And this is some of us, I wrote a book about this after I left being governor. Industrial strategy, we've largely poo-pooed it. You don't want government interfering in the economy, et cetera. However, we're, of course, in a global economy, and other governments are aggressively interfering, if you will, intervening in the economy. And so the question is, what is our uniquely American way of making America continue to have a manufacturing backbone? And that's why it is government-enabled but private sector-led. And that's what tax credits are all about. It incentivizes the location of these manufacturing facilities. The good news is these incentives last 10 years so far, and hopefully they will continue, but it makes America an incredibly enticing place to invest in, and that's exciting for Michigan.
As we're making the trend towards EVs that's taking place here, there's some concern about fewer jobs because a car that's powered with an internal combustion engine has way, way, way more parts than a car with an EV, which gets into jobs and everything there, particularly in this room with autos, suppliers, people related to this. And I know you've been going around the country talking about clean energy and all the jobs. How does it juxtapose here in a place like Michigan, which is so dominant with autos and manufacturers and other things, suppliers?
Yeah, there's definitely, that's definitely something we've been considering and worried about, of course, is the jobs numbers. There are fewer assembly jobs, clearly, for an EV. But if we are smart about getting this full battery supply chain, those are jobs that are additive jobs. And so that's what's really exciting. This agenda is slated to create 1 million jobs a year for the next 10 years. And so Michigan is primed to be able to get that, because you do want to create that industrial cluster that has the full supply chain. Or if not the full supply chain, you know, you've got some great mines in the UP, for example, nickel mine, but they may be running out of nickel, so you may have to friendshore some of the minerals that are going to be necessary. But I will say this too, Carol, we don't even know right now what is going to be the technology. I mean, there's research that's being done in private sector labs, and certainly at the Department of Energy. We've got 17 national labs, 100,000 scientists that are working on problems like this. And so those jobs of the future and the jobs of the present will be extremely fulsome. And we want to be able to train the next generation of scientists. We want you guys all to go into clean energy and help to save our planet, in addition to create jobs here. It's exciting work, but there will be lots of jobs. And the last thing I'll say is that Bloomberg has estimated that this clean energy sector overall will be worth $23 trillion globally by 2030. $23 trillion. That is massive. And the question is, where is that investment going to go? It's going to go to the countries that have aggressively fought for it and make a competitive case for those businesses to be located there. And the United States has done that now.
Let's talk a little bit about solar. As you know, I like to spend as much time as possible in Scottsdale, Arizona, where the sun is shining 300 plus days a year. And though Michigan's had great weather recently, that is not typically the case for long periods of time here. Michigan, like other states, unlike Arizona, California, Florida, do not have the type of sunshine that these other states do. Hence, gets into the prospects of solar and it as one of the solutions to this whole energy, clean energy conversation.
Yeah, it is a solution. It may not be the only solution. You know, solar panels work on light, not heat. So if you've got light, they work, right? Even in the cold, even, you know, in fact, on snowy, clear days or days that have just snowed, they can be even more effective. So, and the payback for solar panels is about 10 years, but there's now solar incentives for you to put solar panels on your roof, 30% tax credit. For those of you who may be interested, there's so many more tax credits for that are going to be coming out within the next couple of months. But solar is one of them, and it's already on the books. So solar is a solution. You know, wind obviously in Michigan has been a very powerful component of their renewable energy standard. Michigan is also has got the very largest pumped storage hydroelectric facility in the country in Ludington. You have some nuclear, and another nuclear plant that is maybe going to remain open. At least it's being vied.
Anything else you want to talk about there?
There's just, I know that somebody
only
has.
a few friends here. You can share
Full
with the
Tech
class.
has asked to keep it open, and obviously there's a competitive process that determines that. But you've got a whole suite of clean, zero carbon emitting solutions in addition to producing a zero carbon emitting vehicle. And so this is sort of a hotbed place for all of these technologies to not just be born out, but to be deployed as well. So that's exciting. And one other thing on the vehicle side. Are we done?
Yeah.
Already?
Somebody's phone? Who's calling? Joe Biden's calling to tell you something, I think.
All right. He's telling me, don't forget to tell them about the virtual power plants. So, you know, which gets me to what I wanted to say is that Michigan is like in a position because of the vehicles to be leading in the technology associated with creating a virtual power plant. And what that basically is, for those of you who are not in this, you know, you're making cars right now with bidirectional charging where you can give back to the grid and you can take power from the grid in your vehicle, right? And you've got batteries in your vehicle so you can store energy. Well, what a virtual power plant does is sort of assemble all of those batteries when the power grid is down and gets, with your permission, allows for the grid to take from the assembled batteries when they're not in use to be able to power the grid. It creates enormous efficiency and resilience in grids. And you all, because of the number of manufacturing, but also uptake in vehicles, it is a moment. There's a lot of real interest in what we call VPPs across the country, having that two-way conversation with the battery.
So I know when we all got into the room here a little while ago, and I was talking with people, and this marks the return of the Breakfast Club, the first time since the
Congratulations,
pandemic.
by the way.
Thank you for being here for all of this. We know the pandemic changed our lives, and I guess one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that the Department of Energy had a role in the vaccines and bringing that in. It's sort of, you would think that's a Health and Human Services thing. How did the department get involved with that?
Yeah, so that's such a great question because these 17 national labs, and when I say labs, I'm talking about like not one room with some guys in lab coats. These are massive laboratory facilities strewn across the country. And they have user facilities with huge tools like exascale computers, cyclotrons, et cetera, huge tools. So scientists from around the globe come to our labs to be able to use these massive user facilities. One of the user facilities had, because we have these incredible microscopes that can look at the smallest subatomic particles, they identified an enzyme that was actually helpful in being able for Pfizer and Moderna to be able to use in the COVID vaccine. And those labs also were doing prototypes of testing, of masks as well. So we created a virtual biology lab, essentially, with all of our labs to be able to work together to identify the best way to be able to attack that virus.
So Ambassador Blanchard, who I've talked to, he's sitting
Where
over
is he?
here. Where is Ambassador Blanchard?
There he
he's
is.
sitting over there. Hello, hello. Talked about, speaking of the labs, the nuclear fusion and what's going on. Michigan State is involved and is going to be a game changer. So if you could just real succinctly explain what is a development. I know it's been in process for 60 years, but how is it going to change things?
So just ground setting, fission is how you get your nuclear power today. You split atoms. They come apart and it creates energy. Fusion is where you're pushing together subatomic particles, isotopes, to create energy. In the process of fission, it creates nuclear waste. In the process of fusion, there's no nuclear waste created. So the great thing about fusion is that it is abundant. I mean, the basic element is hydrogen, 2 isotopes of hydrogen. It is abundant. It is not non-waste producing. And the challenge is fusion essentially replicates the process on the sun. So that's hard to do. In December of last year, one of our labs, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, has a huge fusion ignition facility. And it has 192 massive lasers that point at a single target to be able to fuse these subatomic particles. And they've been trying to do it for 60 years. And finally, in December, they did it. What it did was you produce more energy coming out of the reaction than what it took to create the reaction. That's what fusion ignition is. So the president has a decadal vision for fusion, for commercial fusion. We want to see commercial entities take this on and see if we can make smaller version, 192 lasers, billions of taxpayer dollars. That's not going to be replicable, but a commercial version of it. And so there are companies right now that are using magnets to create fusion, that are using lasers to create fusion, that are using something called a tokamak to create fusion. We want to see what happens. There's probably about 30 companies in the United States that are being funded in various ways by the Department of Energy, and they're at various stages. But we think that we're going to see the first commercial fusion plant up and running within a decade. And that would crack the code on how we can create abundant, clean energy.
This is mind-boggling stuff here. The fact that there's something going on with our climate. It should not be a partisan issue here. Obviously, we're seeing snow in Scottsdale, wildfires here, lower or colder temperatures in different parts of the country when they should not be having that kind of weather. I mean, there's something going on with the climate here. And I know everybody says getting away immediately from fossil fuel immediately would help with that immediately. But talk a little bit about how, when you're viewing safeguarding the planet versus this administration and your view of energy and putting this together, given that obviously the planet's here forever.
Yeah, it's such an important question. I mean, the folks who are outside feel, and we all should feel, an enormous sense of urgency because of what we're seeing across the planet. I mean, today there were stories in India of 120-degree heat. I mean, it is killing people across the world. And it's killing people here as well. I mean, Texas in a huge heat wave. Puerto Rico, a huge heat wave. The grid goes down. We've spent last year $165 billion cleaning up after extreme weather events just in the United States, $165 billion. In the 80s, it used to be like $10 billion. So the escalation of these extreme climate events should concern us all. So, I mean, I would be out there marching with them in terms of, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. On the other hand, you cannot just flip a switch because we have whole economies that have been built up around using fossil fuels. And so the question is, what does that transition look like? We call it a transition because our goal is to get to 100% clean electricity on the grid by 2035 and net zero by 2050. Net zero suggests that there will still be some fossil fuel usage, but it will be decarbonized. And there's a lot of technology about how you can remove CO2 from the atmosphere and remove CO2 from fossil production. Understandably, people want us to get to that clean energy tomorrow. And we would love to do that too. And that's why we are so aggressively moving. But we do have 27 years to get to net zero, and that's our commitment to doing that. And we want to do it in a way that does not harm people. And so there are communities around this country that have been raised, like people who are working in the oil industry, who are just making a good living, and who need to transition as well. So what can we do? We look at the oil industry as an opportunity to move to geothermal. Geothermal is the heat beneath our feet. They're good at extracting fossil fuels from beneath our feet. Why not extract the heat that's down there? It's everywhere. And with fracking technology, you can go deep and pull up heat that spins a turbine and creates electricity. That is clean baseload power. And we need them to invest in that. And by the way, the workers who are doing that have the same skill set as workers in the fossil fuel industry. So we're working on identifying the types of job matches and clean energy opportunities that can allow communities to transition and not be left behind. And so, you know, I mean, Michigan has a version of this, right, which is the auto industry with the internal combustion engine. You can't turn it tomorrow and have it be all electric. But we're moving in this direction. I mean, my goodness, we've seen incredible trajectory of uptake in electric vehicles. In fact, you know, you were talking about we want it to be half by 2030 of new vehicles sold be electric. There are projections now that without any goal setting, it's going to happen. It's going to be 60% of electric vehicles sold by 2030. You know, people are making this choice, but we've got to do it in a way that brings people along and doesn't create a backlash. And we are going to do it. We are going to do it. But I appreciate the impatience because we should all be incredibly impatient.
You were governor when the energy grid in the Midwest crashed. Several states were affected. I remember this immensely because I was at Comerica Park with a few friends of yours on behalf of the late, great Mike Ilitch, Denise Ilitch, and some guy named Jim Stapleton, along with the baseball commissioner, Bud Selick, who were getting set to announce the 2005 All-Star Major League Baseball game coming to Detroit when literally the lights went out during the middle of the announcement. Talk about a killjoy. Talk about the reliability of our nation's energy grid and security, and what, if anything, is being done to make sure those kinds of things don't happen again.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, we have the largest machine on Earth in the United States in the form of the utility grid. It is massive, but it was built up at a time where, they put wires on poles, wood poles, and a lot of times they haven't even been updated or replaced. It is, the system is not resilient, and the system doesn't have enough capacity. So, for example, if we want to really move to clean electricity, so we're not emitting CO2, then we've got to electrify stuff, including the vehicle industry, right? If you're going to put that much more electricity on the grid, you've got to triple the capacity on that grid. So what does that mean? Does that mean triple the number of wires? Not necessarily. You can do something called advanced reconductoring, which is new materials stringing wires, which gets you twice, maybe 3 times as much electricity going across the same wire. So we need to significantly expand our grid, the capacity on our grid. We've got, for those of you who know from megawatts to gigawatts to kilowatts, we have to add 2,000 gigawatts of clean electricity to our grid to get to that goal of zero carbon emission by 2035, a clean grid. Now, so that's one thing. We have to add the capacity. We have to make it more secure, and that means secure from cyber and secure from these extreme weather events. So that means also we've got to consider undergrounding wires in some places that are particularly vulnerable. We need to think about microgrids, meaning not everybody connected to a central grid that if that goes down, everybody else goes down, but there may be, you can create pockets of electricity in communities that make them resilient. So part of what the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act do is to incentivize both the addition of capacity on the grid, the addition of more resilient measures on the grid, and the addition of making it more cyber secure, which is also very important. That's all part of this agenda.
Mm-hmm. There were a few pipeline projects that the administration inherited, one here in Michigan to our north, and it's clear the administration's direction is over time to diminish the use of fossil fuel. And obviously lots of people say that process is not happening quick enough for all of us. Talk about that and how you see these sorts of, and we go to this transition time with these pipelines and what's going to be happening there and getting it so juxtapose the two.
Yeah, I mean, these are the hardest questions, right? Because of this notion that you need to get power, you need to have power in places. So, for example, some pipelines are for our own energy security. Some pipelines don't need to be built. We need to build pipelines that can carry other things like hydrogen or like CO2. If we're going to take CO2 from the atmosphere and sequester it, you may need a pipeline to take it to where it can be stored underneath the ground to get it out of the atmosphere. So not all pipelines are bad, but we have to be really thoughtful about what building infrastructure that we know may be obsolete going forward. I will say this. Because of the war in Ukraine, Carol, this has created a bifurcation based on energy in the globe. I mean, it's amazing how Europe's vulnerability, because they cannot access Russian natural gas, created an alliance of countries that were willing to help them out so that their lights wouldn't go out. So we have permitted a number of liquefied natural gas exports to be able to help them out. But on the other side, they are looking at ways that they can have temporary receipt of that. So offshore LNG facilities that are floating while they accelerate toward this renewable future that they want. How do you address the immediate crisis and still accelerate toward that clean energy future? That is really happening. The bifurcation I talk about is that everybody is looking at ways to be energy secure. We all see what it means to have a reliance, an over-reliance on one party for your energy system, or for a product for that matter. So China has such a big footprint on batteries and on solar panels. That's an over-reliance on a country, who may be a competitor or whose values we may not share. So for our own energy security, being able to produce homegrown energy and the products that get us to that homegrown energy is really important. And I will say the reason why renewable energy is so appealing on this, in addition to it being clean, is that it cannot be weaponized. No one has ever held a country hostage to access to the wind or to access to sun, right? It's homegrown energy and cheap. So this is why the push is happening to renewable energy, and that's why I think you're going to see less emphasis on the fossil infrastructure, except when you have these extreme moments, and more emphasis on clean energy infrastructure.
There has been a heated debate, no pun intended, over the future of gas stoves. I read that you yourself have a gas stove. Is that true?
It's true.
It's true. Okay. So clarify, what is the administration's position on gas stoves and the possible banning of them?
Okay, there is no ban on gas stoves. Let me be clear. It's so frustrating when just a routine action gets politicized in this way. So the Department of Energy for decades has put out efficiency guidelines for appliances. So you have a much more efficient refrigerator now. You have efficient light bulbs now. We also do stoves. We do microwaves. We do all of this. We put out appliances to continually make them more efficient. So we put out a rule to make stoves more efficient, both electric and gas. Now, for whatever reason, political or not, the fact that we put out a rule to make gas stoves more efficient means that some of the gas stoves that are on the market today are inefficient. And so they have, these are the gas stoves that are inefficient. The ones that have very large grates and burners that cause more gas to be released into your home rather than going to the pot. And so we are asking, and those are usually high-end gas stoves. They're all high-end gas stoves. And so to make the change for manufacturers who are selling them into the future, because no one is talking about any gas stove that you have in your house. Nobody's going to come to your home, take your gas stove. Believe me, that's not where we're at. But for future manufacturers, to be able to make the change, to have the burner be more efficient, it costs, for those high-end gas stoves, about $12. That's it. I mean, half of the gas stoves are not affected at all by this. It's only the highest end, $12, so that you're not breathing methane in your home and it's going to the pot. Is that so horrible? And it's not going to take effect till like 2027.
You know, out of everything,
that's what all this is.
You know what we're talking about here. That'll be what everybody's talking about. That'll get the headline coverage, I bet. The gas stove.
Gas stove.
People want
no
their gas
one
stove.
is banning your gas stove. I'm keeping my gas stove. Although I do like induction stoves, I will say.
So, Madam Secretary, in the audience today, we have representations of the auto industry and the healthcare industry and the financial services and small business, and we're talking about EVs and batteries and so forth. But talk a little bit about the clean energy focused future and how it's going to affect people in their homes and in their schools and businesses. How will it be manifested?
Yeah, it made me think when Nicole was making that beautiful statement connecting the Juneteenth to knowledge and the role of newspapers and communicators on this, which is such a beautiful connection for today. Now, I'm going to jump because I don't want you to make a connection that I'm talking about Juneteenth when I'm talking about making sure you can buy induction stoves.
You have the microphone. You can say what you want. That's all.
Right.
It's yours.
Right. But I do want to say the importance of knowledge and of getting the word out is really important on how real people can benefit from some of these tax credits that are coming down the pike. So in the fall, not right now, but in the fall, people will have access to a whole suite of tax credits to make their homes more energy efficient. So whether it's tax credits to insulate, tax credits for windows, tax credits for induction stoves, tax credit for heat pumps, which are amazing. If your furnace goes out and you want to replace it, I highly recommend a heat pump. A heat pump does both heating and air conditioning, and they're selling even more heat pumps now than they are regular furnaces, because it's much more efficient. All of these efficiencies bring down the cost for people. The president has been really focused on lowering costs for real people, and so being able to do that. If you If you get an electric vehicle, you can get $7,500 off if it's made in America, right? If you buy a used electric vehicle, it's $4,000 off. If you lease that electric vehicle, you can still, hopefully the dealers, and I know the dealers are here, you're going to pass along that credit, right, so that people will be able to buy electric vehicles without as many of the, the restrictions. You can also get charging infrastructure at your home with tax credits as well. You can get new your wall panel, your electrical panel also replaced with tax credits. There's a whole slew coming out to incentivize the electrification of people's homes, in addition to tax credits for putting on solar panels, et cetera. So for real people, there's a slew of stuff coming out that is very exciting to help electrify their homes.
Well, as you mentioned, this is Juneteenth, and I'm wondering how your department and the administration are making sure that communities of color are included in the shift to clean energy and benefit. For example, we have Natalie King from Dunamis Charge here. She launched Black Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, BEVI, which is an organization made up of other companies of color. Again, you talked about how many trillions of dollars that are going to be created here. How much of a priority to the department under your watch, and what are you doing to try to make sure that companies of diverse backgrounds are included in this?
Yeah, the first executive orders that the president signed involved executive orders that ensure that 40% of the benefits of all of these investments go to communities that have been left behind, communities that have been unseen, disadvantaged communities, communities that are on the fence line, perhaps breathing in pollution that's causing asthma, et cetera. 40% of the benefits. So how does that work in real life? We at the Department of Energy have a series of grants that we are giving out. So say, for example, I'll use hydrogen. We want to create clean hydrogen hubs across the country. Those clean hydrogen hubs, they come together, they vie for it. 20% of the application as they vie for it is based on whether the hub has a community benefits plan. Are they hiring the people? Do they have a workforce strategy? Is there a way that the community is getting benefit as a result of this investment in their community? So we want to make sure that, people talk about structural racism. We want to have structural equity built into this. 40% of the benefits go to that, and that's very much deep for what we are doing. We have a lot of place-based strategies that are targeting communities that we really want to put at the front of the line rather than at the back of the line.
Well, in fact, I'm looking at the index card questions that are starting to come in here. Amy, where are you? Raise your hand here if you have more. Please get them to Amy's direction there. 2 questions, and again, that question is just about this. We're small companies. We're struggling to find funding in the Midwest. How can we take advantage of the DOE funding?
Yeah, go to anybody interested in this, we are revamping our DOE website, but you can see what the grant opportunities that are coming out. There's 2 ways to get funding from the federal government in this space. One is through grant, and there's a competitive application that you have to go through. It's peer-reviewed for technology, for viability, for marketability, et cetera. But that's one way, and it's all sorts of technologies. We've got water technologies, air technologies, battery technologies, you name it, a whole series of funding opportunity announcements, FOAs, that are coming out, and we encourage you to check that out on our website. And the second is through tax credits, and those tax credits are administered through the Department of Treasury. But you can look to see where the incentives are, what kinds of businesses, et cetera. Let me just give you one quick example on the tax credits that people may not realize. Say you are a solar developer, and you decide you want to work in multifamily or low-income housing. So you get a 30% tax credit off the top as a solar developer for this project. Because you are working in low-income housing, you get another 20%. Now it's a 50% tax credit. If you use American content, domestic content, that's another 10%. That's a 60% tax credit. That's amazing. If, there's so many pieces like this. If you're building your project using apprenticeship labor, you get another 10%. I mean, there's just, that's why I say these tax credits are irresistible. All of this information is on our website, so if you're thinking about it, it is a moment to be in developing clean energy.
Question here from Detroit City Councilman Coleman Young II. Coleman Young, where are you? Wave your hand. He's over there. Okay, here's his question. Is there a plan to have more roads that charge electric vehicles by driving on them?
Well, we're not there yet, but I know this technology is definitely under research at our laboratories. Oak Ridge National Lab in particular has a whole test bed of how you might be able to charge from below. It's expensive at this moment, but you know what? The iPhone was expensive when it first came out too. So we envision that charging that is in roads is potentially one of the ways that you won't have to plug in. There's that kind of charging now if you're standing on or if you're sitting, your car is sitting on a pad, you can still do it. But moving along the road is what we're trying to crack the code on.
Well, in fact, they're doing it down at Michigan Central, where you drive over by this train station, the shuttered train station coming to life, and Ford and others are all teaming up and bringing that together. So that'll be interesting.
Exciting. Yeah, the private sector is really moving on this.
So you spent a good, I'm sorry?
First in the country. We love that.
Yeah. Another calling card for the Motor City, right? There we go. So you spent a good portion of your career here, and dating back to your administration, then Snyder's, and now Governor Whitmer's, the focus here has been on getting talent, keeping talent, population dwindling. You're outside Michigan on a regular basis now. You're in the Beltway. Curious your perspective on Michigan and how we're perceived as a place to come and build a career.
Can I just say, I love the latest social media that I've seen from the governor's office about recruiting people to come here. And I don't, there's all this, these social rifts that are happening in the country. But if you are, if you are somebody who feels threatened by laws in your state because maybe you're a member of the LGBTQ community, come to Michigan. If you are a woman who wants to have freedom of choice, come to Michigan. That's, I think, really compelling for a lot of people who feel afraid. In addition to that, I think the advertising of Michigan being the solution to climate change, because I think young people especially want to do something that's beyond self and work in a time and a place that has values, that is consistent with theirs, working on solving a problem that is an existential problem. This is the place to come. And not only that, but you don't have to suffer 113-degree heat waves 6 months of the year, right? Come. You enjoy the seasons are getting less, I know, but I mean, Michigan is just this fabulous place to be. So take that Pure Michigan advertising campaign, which I launched, I know, when I was governor, and continue to amp it, because I don't know why people wouldn't move to this state. And I know John Rakolta's heading that. I know John, is he here? He's here somewhere. He was here. He's heading this commission. Just missed him. Anyway, I know he was tapped by Governor Whitmer to head the commission about how to continue to recruit people here. And I think in a bipartisan way, it is a great message for Michigan to really be championing, not just in Michigan, because you want people to stay, but also outside of Michigan. Come here. We will make a great, safe home for you.
Someone here who has amazing penmanship. I have to give you an A for penmanship here. Really, this is nice and easy to read. With the recent development of fuel cell hydrogen vehicles, when do you anticipate these vehicles will become more mainstay and affordable?
Yeah, I think the fuel cell vehicle, as we know, for heavy-duty trucks, semi-trucks, fleet vehicles, huge opportunity. The infrastructure obviously is expensive, but here again, there are incentives to be able to bring down the cost and make sure that that happens. This, I do think at this moment, with the knowledge that I have, that fuel cells are going to be the solution for heavy trucks, heavy transportation, and that obviously battery will be for lightweight. However, all those battery makers are still trying to compete with fuel cells as well, so who knows who's going to win, but I do think it's going to happen soon, and it is already being piloted all across the country. Fuel cells are both for passenger regular old cars as well as for heavy-duty transportation.
And I was just informed that question came from one of our DPS students, which beautiful penmanship, by the way.
Wow!
Yeah. Yes.
Here's to good penmanship,
Yes.
honestly.
So this forum, the theme of this whole speaker series, your career, what we're doing, why we're in this room on a day off for many people is because we care about the future here. You've got young people here who are looking to maybe get careers in this new energy space. What piece of advice would you give somebody, one of these young people starting out here, things they should be keeping in mind or doing to have a brighter future in this area?
Yeah, here's what I would say is, I think that if I were to go back, I would totally take science, technology, engineering, and math. I would love to feel comfortable, to have felt in high school. That was not where I was, but having the experience that I have. If you want to solve the world's greatest problems, focusing on the STEM fields, doing a camp, getting comfortable, putting your hands on materials, seeing it, as opposed to just doing it in the classroom. It's just, there's so many apprenticeships that are available. The first robotics, get on a team that is doing that, because that field is going to solve climate change. It just is, and that to me is the biggest crisis that we face. So I would do that if it were the young me. Now, for some people that doesn't appeal to them. So then I would say, go into public policy and make sure you work in an area where you can have the landscape do what we've just done here in the United States, which makes the U.S. the place for the solutions to solve climate change to come. So one of those two would be an area that would be areas that I would say are important. But I would also say, if you're looking for a field that has all of the things that will make you feel fulfilled as a human, because you will be solving the world's greatest problems, I would encourage you to look at clean energy. We are in the middle. Sometimes you don't know that you are in the middle of history when you're in the middle of it. And right now, we are in the middle of this history-making change. And Michigan is the tip of the spear. And I hope you feel it, because these changes are happening right now. I, for one, feel so lucky to be in this chair at this moment. And for those of you who are working in this space, I know you feel the sea change happening. And for you students, I hope that you will lead us in this direction so that we actually do solve this huge problem for humanity and have a great life while you're at it.
It's yes. Yeah, we are winding things down here. We've talked about a lot of things, and I'm sure coming into this, you probably, in your head, rolling around different things we might be talking about here. Is there one point you would want to make to people in the audience here, a takeaway, if you will, you would like them to leave the room with about this whole thing, of this revolution, evolution that's taking place here, that is so turning things upside down in so many different industries and will continue to do so? What's the one takeaway you would like to have them leave here?
Obviously I'm working for President Biden, and so I'm cognizant that I know this is a nonpartisan event, but I will just say this, that putting leaders in place who understand the importance of investing in our nation, investing in the future and these solutions is really, really important. And you should just feel as a state incredibly proud that Michigan and Michigan's experience, and therefore when he was vice president, Joe Biden's experience of us when we were on our knees, has had this incredible impact on the trajectory of the nation in this clean energy and climate change space. So I want you to, you can tell your children and your grandchildren that you were there when this meaningful shift occurred, that you were there for the worst of times, and you're going to be there for the best of times too. I feel it. I hope you do too.
Secretary Granholm, we can't thank you enough for taking time out of your hectic schedule to spend time with us, talk about the revolution, give us some of your insights into it. Safe travels to you, and I look forward to talking to you again. Again, thank you to all the sponsors here. Thank you to all of you for being here so early on this morning, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Breakfast Club. Stay tuned on that. Everyone have a great day, and we'll reconvene later here. Thank you. All right, that was great. You did a great job. So nice meeting you. So nice to meet you.